When it comes to fighting games, there's some unspoken rules, whether players or designers realize it or not. One such rule is that there's always going to be a Ryu on the roster. I don't mean that literally, or even in the sense that every roster has to have a stoic, gi-wearing martial artist as its lead, but more so what Ryu provides as a function. Ryu, 9 times out of 10, is generally a good character to learn the fundamentals of whatever fighting game he's in. There are exceptions, but the idea of character toolkits at their most basic, consisting of a projectile, an uppercut with invulnerability, and a forward advancing special move can be attributed to him. There's many characters across the genre that fit the Ryu role. We'd be here all day if we were talking about who's the Ryu of their respective fighting game. But there's another unspoken rule that isn't quite as ubiquitous, but is still incredibly prevalent. If your fighting game has a Ryu, then there's a good chance that it has a Ken too. Ken was a character born from the need for the very first Street Fighter game to have head-to-head multiplayer. Ryu is the only playable character in the arcade ladder, but inserting a coin in the player 2 slot allows a second player to challenge you with Ken. Ken has the exact same moveset and frame data, but with a unique design to differentiate him from Ryu. He's as blatant a function as it gets. And yet, thanks to some smart decisions made with Ken over the years, he's grown from simply being a fighting echo of Ryu into his own character with a more independently identifiable playstyle, while still sticking to the Shoto archetype that Ryu established. You choose Ryu to learn the fundamentals. You choose Ken if you want to throw some stank on that shit. Ken Masters is the son of a Japanese businessman and a Japanese-American woman. During one summer, his father sends him to the dojo of his best friend, a martial arts master named Goken, hoping for his son to learn a thing or two from him. While Ken took a bit to adjust, he came to respect Goken and his teachings, and would become fast friends with another youth around the same age staying there, Ryu, forming a friendship that still endures to this day. Once Goken had believed that the two had learned all they could from him as young adults down the line, the two went their own separate ways, Ken participating in and winning several US-based martial arts tournaments, while Ryu would set his eyes on an international tournament hosted by a certain Muay Thai champion, forming the events of the first Street Fighter game. After Ryu's sketchy victory over Sagat and his struggle with the Satsui no Hado, Ryu would begin questioning his reasons for even fighting. Ken, who just met his then girlfriend and future wife Eliza, would catch wind of his victory over Sagat and track Ryu down. After fighting Ryu and seeing how troubled he currently was, Ken gave him the hairband he used for his own hair to serve as a memento and a reminder of what to do to find the answers he needs. That headband would go on to become the one that Ryu would use from Street Fighter 2 onwards. The experience has Ken reconsidering his own life, but seeing the friendly rivalry between Sakura and Kaden Kanzuki and how they're pushing each other to get better reminds him of and reinvigorates his own rivalry with Ryu. This goes on to become something of a recurring theme for Ken throughout the series. He tries to find a balance between fighting and family life, especially after marrying Eliza after the events of Street Fighter 2, and doubly so after the birth of his son Mel. Whenever Ken's desire to grow stronger wavers though, something involving Ryu always comes up to reinvigorate his fighting spirit, and he throws himself into the fray yet again. Street Fighter 6 is where things take an interesting turn for Ken, being specifically targeted by the game's main antagonist JP and framed for an international terrorist incident. While his name is cleared, enough damage has been done that he lays low and away from his family, waiting for a chance to strike back at JP. That aside though, Ken is always the flashier, somewhat showboating fighter compared to Ryu. While they both started out the same, Ken over time began to get more tools that facilitated a more pressure-heavy playstyle, whether it be his crazy kicks in older titles, his command run shenanigans in 5, or his Jinrai kicks in 6. When the Street Fighter series crossed over with X-Men with the aptly titled X-Men vs Street Fighter, it was obvious that Ken would make the roster. He's easily one of the most recognizable faces in fighting games, and the Versus games ended up providing a new, interesting avenue for him to further differentiate himself from Ryu. In the Marvel vs games, Ken's voice is provided by Tetsuya Iwanaga, who also voices him in Street Fighter Alpha, where a lot of his voice clips were largely pulled from for the Versus games. He also voiced Guy in the Alpha series, as well as having roles in several anime such as Seishiro in Princess 9, great show by the way, Leon in the Virtua Fighter anime, and notably Marek in Yu-Gi-Oh! It's been a bit since we've last done a Street Fighter character on here, so let's just jump into things, shall we? Ken's theme in X-Men vs Street Fighter is an arrangement of his iconic Street Fighter 2 stage theme, this version being arranged by Yuki Iwai. I'm a big fan of this rendition for many reasons, not the least of which is for being done in a similar key to the original CPS-1 rendition, as opposed to the version used in Super Street Fighter 2. I don't know how I'd rate all the arrangement of Ken's Street Fighter 2 theme if I had to rank them, but this one is definitely top 5 for me. This one was my favorite song in the game for a pretty long time. X-Men vs. Street Fighter is one of those games where it's less about characters being bad and more so just not being grimy enough to keep up with the best. Ken generally falls somewhere near the lower end, but that doesn't mean he's lacking some dumb stuff. He has a diagonal aerial Hadouken. Shoryuken can now be done in the air and it works as a standard air combo ender mid-screen. And he has a unique crossover combination with Ryu. That said, he's not dog water or anything, but compared to the top and high tiers, he's just not as overtly busted as they are, even factoring in infinites. Ken's design and sprite work, like nearly every other Street Fighter character in the game, is taken from Street Fighter Alpha. Ken had started getting small changes to differentiate himself from Street Fighter 2 onwards, but the Alpha games really kicked it into high gear, and the Versus games are no exception. Ken has a few command normals worth talking about here. First is Toe Kick, done with up and medium kick in the air. Next is Whirlwind Kick, done with up and heavy kick in the air. All three Shotos in X-Men vs. Street Fighter have this move, and it works similarly for all three. This move can be used for some fun corner juggles and can even set up one of the game's funnier infinites. Last is an Azuma Kick, done with forward and medium kick. This is Ken's trademark command overhead. This move goes back to Super Turbo, where it was a part of Ken's heavy kick oriented special moves. Holding the kick button during their inputs had Ken follow up with this move. In the Alpha games, it became a command normal separate from the kick starting with Alpha 1. Ken's first special move is the Hadouken. Ken's Hadouken is notably smaller than Ryu's massive one in this game, looking more like a traditional Street Fighter sized projectile. While he can use this in the air like Ryu can here, there's one major difference. Ken's aerial Hadouken is fired with one hand and travels downwards diagonally, making it closer to Akuma's fireball rather than Ryu's, which is a pretty interesting change. Ken's had this since the very first Street Fighter game. Of course, there's the Shoryuken. The height and distance traveled depends on the strength of the punch button used. While all three Shoto moves are iconic, the Shoryuken is the one most closely associated with Ken, almost purely due to its variation setting opponents on fire. The heavy version specifically can do the same here, but there's one additional feature. They can also be done in the air, giving Ken a pretty okay mid-screen air combo ender. Like with the Hadouken, Ken's had this in Street Fighter 1. Next is the Tatsumaki.
Good.
The Tatsu's pretty no frills here in X-Men vs. Street Fighter. It's also usable in the air as has been the case since Hyper Fighting, though Ken's had the move itself since the first Street Fighter game. Ken's first super is the Shoryu Reppa, done with the quarter circle forward and 2 punches. This one is Ken's longest tenured super move, first appearing in Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo as Ken's lone super. It's an iconic enough super that it's homaged in other games, such as Yuri Sakazaki having a similarly named equivalent in The King of Fighters, and even Virgil having a shoutout to it in Devil May Cry 4 and 5 Special Edition. Next is the Shinryuken, done with the quarter circle forward and 2 kicks.
Marvelous! Marvelous!
Ken crouches for a bit before rising into the air with a spinning flaming uppercut, a giant pillar of flame surrounding him. While the Shinryuken has been in Street Fighter before, the giant flame pillar is a new addition for the Versus games. This specific variation was also directly referenced in Ken's appearance in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, with Sakurai specifically citing that the Smash version was borrowed from the Marvel Versus games. Ken first got this super in Street Fighter Alpha 1. Like every other character in the game, Ken has a team super, but unlike everyone else, he has a unique one depending on his partner. Normally, he'll do a Shoryu Rep as his team super, but if he's paired up with Ryu, he'll do a double Shinku Hadouken, giant ass beam and all. Given all of the ways Capcom homaged in the Street Fighter Alpha games, this is likely a nod to the Street Fighter 2 animated movie, where Ryu and Ken defeat Bison with a combined Hadouken. Here are Ken's colors in the arcade version. And here's his exclusive bonus colors in the Saturn version of the game. And here's his ending. Ken's endings in the Versus games do a fun thing where they pretty explicitly frame the event of the game as non-canon, either as a video game as we see here, or a dream, as we'll see later. Also, Ken's ending is notable for featuring the first appearance in any video game of Mel Masters, Ken's son, but this wasn't intended to be the case. Mel was supposed to show up in Street Fighter 3 New Generation first, but because of that game's dev issues and delays, X-Men vs. Street Fighter ended up releasing first with this cameo instead. As you'd expect, Ken returns in Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter, sporting a completely original theme. And maybe a controversial opinion here, but this is straight up my favorite Ken theme of all time. Ken's themes are usually either laid back like Funky Bay in Second Impact, or incredibly high energy like his Street Fighter 2 theme, and this one firmly falls into the latter camp. I can just imagine Ken putting on a hell of a show during a fighting tournament when listening to this theme. It's incredibly fitting for a guy whose uppercuts literally ignite people. This one's another Yugi Iwai banger. Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter still see some small tweaks for Ken, but overall he's still largely the same. Hadouken has a bigger hitbox. He gets his Shibu Jinrai super from Street Fighter 3, and his grounded Tatsu now travels upwards instead of purely horizontally. His Hadoukens, however, now fizzle out after traveling a certain distance. And honestly, if you're going to choose a Shoto in this game, Akuma is probably the one with the most reward. Ken doesn't have too many changes in Marvel vs. Street Fighter, but the ones he does have are immediately noticeable and serve to differentiate him from Ryu even further. For one, Ken's Hadouken is now massive compared to its previous incarnation. However, there's one massive drawback. It now only travels about half screen on the ground before dissipating. This range is even worse in the air. Ken's Tatsu also gets changed in that it now travels diagonally upwards, with Ken kicking the opponent downwards on the final hit. Looks cool, but leaves you even wider open if you whiff it than the traditional Tatsu variant. He also gets a new hyper combo, Shibu Jinrai Kyaku, done with a quarter circle back and 2 kicks. This one comes from Street Fighter 3 and has become a staple part of his moveset from that game onwards. It's one of his most iconic moves. You've probably seen it in another iconic fighting game video too. You know the one. Ken's assist in this game is the Shoryuken.
Shoryuken! Shoryuken!
Like in X-Men vs. Street Fighter, Ken also performs a double Shinku Hadouken if you do a team super with Ryu on his team. Here are Ken's colors in the arcade version. And here's his exclusive bonus colors in the Saturn and PS1 ports of the game. And here's his ending. Ken sat out Marvel vs. Capcom 1, but if you really needed his function, he was still around. Kinda. Thanks to Ryu's complete change system in Marvel 1, you could essentially play as Ken as long as you were okay with spending a bar of meter to do so. That said, his playable form there is more or less identical to Ken's Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter appearance, skimped fireball and all. If you want a detailed breakdown on that moveset in Marvel 1, check out the video for Ryu I did a while back. He also cameos in Ryu's ending as well. However, Ken would return in full as a playable character in Marvel vs. Capcom 2. Marvel vs. Capcom 2 is an interesting game for Ken. He's still pretty honest for the most part, but has a few things, however unintentional, going in his favor this time around. Ken is one of a few characters with a damage bug on one of his attacks. Specifically, his aerial heavy Tatsu can potentially do obscene damage. His anti-air assist is a pretty invincible get off me tool. And he has a pretty reliable, pretty easy to set up infinite with some practical uses. But his mobility is still pretty awful overall, and he struggles without assists to back up his approaches. First off, Ken gets one new tool in his arsenal, Zenpo Tenshin, done with the quarter circle back and punch. This is Ken's command role in the Alpha game, specifically debuting in Alpha 1. Kinda weird that it took this long for him to get it here, but sure. There's two things that elevate Ken from being a character played only for his decent assists to a point character actually worth using. First is the Aryu version of his Tatsu. For whatever reason, likely due to a bug, Ken's Tatsu, when done during an air combo, deals unscaled damage during every hit of the attack, tacking on crazy damage to what would otherwise be an unremarkable air combo. It's somewhat similar to Tron Bonnet having her projectile assist deal massive unscaled damage as well. This makes Ken a character worth playing with, as he can easily melt health bars under the right conditions for a relatively low execution cost. However, if you want even more consistently optimized damage for very slightly higher execution, you can always see if your skills are enough to do the Kenfinite. The Kenfinite is a pretty simple corner infinite Ken can do that can be pretty easily set up with an assist that briefly pops the opponent up in the air. After which, hit light punch, heavy punch, do heavy Tatsu, land, rinse and repeat. It's that simple. Ken's first assist is the Shoryuken. This is usually the assist of choice for Ken. It's one of the best anti-air assists in the game, using the invulnerability inherent to DPs to blow through any and everything pretty safely. His second assist is the Hadoken. His third assist is his Tatsu. This one's actually a pretty decent assist as well, and can potentially lead to combo opportunities as well due to its trajectory. Here are Ken's colors. Ken not only joined the roster of Capcom vs SNK, but is also a part of the in-universe reason for the two companies clashing. The events of Capcom vs SNK take place during a fighting tournament hosted and funded by both the Masters Foundation by Ken and the Garcia concern from Art of Fighting's Robert Garcia. Capcom vs SNK, along with SNK vs Capcom Match of the Millennium on the Neo Geo Pocket Color, also marks the first instance of a friendly cross-company rivalry Ken would start with Fatal Fury protagonist Terry Bogard. A rivalry that's still celebrated to this day, with both characters appearing as guests in the other's latest entry. For the occasion, Ken also gets a sleek new sprite that seems to be a more detailed take on his original Street Fighter II sprite. Ken also gets a new voice actor here, Yuji Kishi, who began voicing Ken in Street Fighter III Third Strike, and has remained Ken's primary Japanese voice actor to this day, notably reprising his role in Street Fighter VI, as well as his guest character appearance in Fatal Fury City of the Wolves. He's had other video game roles, though Ken is his longest served and most prominent one, though he's also done a ton of work in toku shows as well. Ken's back in Capcom vs SNK with a completely new sprite and, as it turns out, a little extra heat. He has a new kick special move, he can combo his light dragon punch into super, and he has pretty great damage overall. His fireball, though, is just okay compared to Ryu and Akuma's, and he's still painfully straightforward. Since the Capcom vs SNK games bring the Street Fighter characters back down to earth some, Ken plays more like his Street Fighter appearances here. He still retains his Inazuma kick command normal, though like in Marvel 2, it's now forward and light kick due to CVS1's button setup. Hadouken still keeps its usual command. As does Shoryuken. Shoryuken, and specifically his light Shoryuken, is a very important move for Ken in CVS1, as it juggles an airborne enemy just high enough to connect with a super move like Shoryurepa, effectively giving Ken a super conformer of a light DP. It's not even difficult to time either, so keep this in mind when playing Ken, as it's one of his best assets and something opponents will have to keep in mind. Ken's Tatsu is more like Street Fighter here, retaining its usual command. He retains Zenpo Tenshin from previous Street Fighter and Versus games as well. However, he gets an entirely new move here as well, Ryusen Kyaku, done with a reverse Dragon Punch motion and kick. Ken does a leaping overhead kick with both feet that knocks the opponent down. It's great as a surprise overhead or for a way to close distance, but it's best used sparingly. This move notably had its input changed between vanilla CVS1 and CVS1 Pro. In vanilla, it was a normal Dragon Punch and kick motion, as opposed to the reverse Dragon Punch motion Pro uses instead. Ken's first super is Shoryurepa, done with a double quarter circle forward motion and punch. If you manage to clip someone with light Shoryuken, this is the super you want to use if you're mid-screen to juggle them. Shinryuken is done with a double quarter circle forward motion and kick. You can mash buttons to increase the damage. Shippujinrai Kyaku is done with a double quarter circle back motion and kick. This one is strictly a level 3 super now. While Ken's normal form in CVS1 is more or less a reflection of his Street Fighter Alpha and Street Fighter 3 incarnations, his EX form is meant to reflect how he played in Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo specifically. He loses his command roll, his new kick special, Shinryuken, and Shippujinrai, but instead gets his old crazy kicks back from Super Turbo. First is Kamabarai Geti, done with a quarter circle down and kick. Next is Nada Atoshi Geti, done with a quarter circle forward and kick. Last is a Soto Mawashi Geti, done with a half circle forward and kick. Like in Super Turbo, Ken can also auto-cancel these kicks into his Inazuma kick overhead by holding the kick button down during the motion. Ken retains Shoryurepa, though it's now done with a quarter circle forward followed by a half quarter circle forward and punch to more closely mimic the Super Turbo input. Here are Ken's colors. Predictably, Ken makes his way to Capcom vs SNK 2's roster with a new suite of system mechanics to take advantage of thanks to the groove system. Ken returns in CVS 2 and he's still generally pretty reliable overall. Like most characters returning from the first game, he consolidates his EX and normal forms from CVS 1, which means he gets his crazy kicks and all three of his supers in the same moveset. He has pretty great pressure overall, and he has some great A-groove custom combos. His fireball is still relatively mediocre though, and Ken has to play a little fast and loose to reliably open opponents up, much more so than other characters. Ken is generally played in C and A groove as he gets access to his most consistent damage there. The vast majority of his moveset remains the same from the first game though. Inazuma Kick is back to being forward and medium kick thanks to CVS2's 6-button layout. Ken also has a new command normal, Ushiro Mawashi Geri, done with forward and heavy kick. This is a step kick command normal that debuted in Street Fighter Alpha 3. Ken gets his crazy kicks back from his EX incarnation in CVS1, but now features more standardized inputs across all 3 variations. Kamabarai Geri is now done with a half circle forward and light kick. Nata Atoshi Geri is now done with a half circle forward and medium kick. And Osoto Mawashi Geri is now done with a half circle forward and heavy kick. As per usual, holding the kick button will have Ken auto-chain said kicks into Inazuma Kick. Here's Ken's character interactions in CVS2.
Come on!
Live and let die. Live and let die.
And here are Ken's colors. Though Ken's last appearance in the Capcom developed Versus game was almost 25 years ago, he still had crossover appearances in fighters and non-fighters alike in that time span. He was in Street Fighter Cross Tekken, as well as the SNK developed Versus titles Match of the Millennium and SVC Chaos. He's also shown up alongside Ryu in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, as well as all 3 of Namco's entries in the Cross series. Most recently, he, along with Chun-Li, make appearances as guest characters in Fatal Fury City of the Wolves, again picking up the friendly rivalry with Terry from Capcom vs SNK in Street Fighter 6. With Ken, it's always a matter of when, not if he'll be in another game, so even with the Versus games on hiatus, you can bet he'll always be in Street Fighter. That's going to do it for this video. As always, thanks for watching, and a special thanks to the patrons that support the channel. Take care, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.